I'm happiest in the saddle.
A fellow sportsman.
I am an FBI agent!
Great Scott!
What do you say we cut the chit-chat? A-hole!
Dogs and cats living together, mass hysteria!
Come with me if you want to live.
Hello, and welcome to Retro Ramble. I'm Charlie McGee.
I'm George McGee.
And this year, ladies and gentlemen, we are time traveling back to the year 2000 to review Sir Ridley Scott's epic swords and sandals classic that is Gladiator.
Dun, 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 dun. Sorry, I'm going to do that a lot throughout this episode.
You can. I mean, I'm going to have to drop a bit of Hans Zimmer. He keeps on popping up on this podcast. But is it fair to say, I always say this was, well, at least for me, this was the film I discovered not only Russell Crowe and Joaquin Phoenix, but also Hans Zimmer. But we're going to probably get into that. Anybody who we are delving into the 2000s, something we've not done on this podcast because George and I focused on 80s and 90s films. But come on, guys, it's 2022 at the time of recording. We're in another decade now. It's fair enough to go back to this era, isn't it, George? And what a film.
Yeah, obviously the whole purpose of this podcast, if you haven't listened before, is Charlie and I are brothers and we cover the films that we grew up with. We're both children growing up in the 80s and 90s, and that's why our lion's share of the films we covered are in those decades. However, we continue to age. It's an unfortunate side effect of life, and we continue to grow up, though some say we haven't.
Speak for yourself, buddy.
Properly grown up. So, as you say, Charlie, it's 22 years ago. Why didn't we do it in 2020? Who knows? We had bigger fish to fry, but I think it's safe to say this is our first swords and sandals movie. There's not that many of them. But yeah, I think it was just something that is a film close to our hearts, and I hadn't watched it for a few years. Had you?
Me neither, but I was reminded how many times I have watched this. So what can listeners look forward to in this episode, George? I think there's going to be a bit of production chat. Would that be fair?
There's quite a lot of behind-the-scenes trivia on this. It wasn't a smooth sailing production, and they make for the best stories. So, yeah, there'll be some production chat. Obviously, we'll talk a little bit about casting. We'll have the usual feature of actors that may have been considered in coulda, woulda, shoulda. And I'm sure, as usual, you and I will go sort of through the sort of highlights and maybe lowlights of the movie.
There's not a lot to take the piss out of. I'm sure George and I will try and find stuff too, but this is an epic modern day classic. A film that's very close to our hearts in that, and I think we're probably going to talk about this in this episode, in that George and I were not so young, at home, living together, watching films on the sofa, but we were just being spoiled by DVD, which had just kind of arrived. So I think there's going to be an entire section talking about what that was like, and films like this that arrived at the birth of DVD. Yeah. So without further ado, shall we drop the trailer?
Yeah, let's get into it.
My signal. Unleash hell.
Who is he?
I'm required to kill, so I kill.
Tell me your name.
My name is Maximus Decimus Meridius. Commander of the armies of the North. Loyal servant to the true Emperor, Marcus Aurelius. Father to a murdered son. Husband to a murdered wife, and I will have my vengeance in this life or the next.
Win the crowd, and you'll win your freedom.
Are you not entertained?
Today I saw a slave become more powerful than the Emperor of Rome.
I will give them something they've never seen before.
Am I not merciful? What we doing live? Echoes in eternity.
So that's what a trailer made in 2000 sounds like. So, George, how did we get this film from Sir Ridley Scott? Was he knighted at the time of release, or was it because of this film that he got knighted?
I have one of my first making of books. I was given one, I think, by mum and dad, maybe one Christmas or birthday of the making of Gladiator, and I've held on to it because I knew one day I would make a podcast about it. And in that, he is just credited as Ridley Scott. So I don't think he was knighted until at least the mid-noughties. So, however, this doesn't start with Ridley Scott, but from what I can see, he was the first director that was approached. So it actually starts with screenwriter David Franzoni, and he came up with the idea whilst he was on a motorcycle trip around the world. So he was taking in Europe, and he was seeing a lot of, how those, Americans love that ancient history, the fact that they don't really have ruins in America because it's a relatively young country. So he was being inspired by seeing things like the Colosseum and other amazing buildings, structures that have been around for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And along the way, he was introduced to a book called Those About to Die by Daniel P. Mannix, which is all about the Roman games. So he had this idea bubbling about. Years later, he managed to get a 3-picture deal with DreamWorks, and his first big film was Amistad. So he's working on that, and he pitches that idea to Spielberg, and Spielberg's like, hey, this sounds like a really exciting movie. Take a couple of producers from DreamWorks, so 2 producers, Walter Parks and Douglas Wick, and find me a director, and let's get this thing working. Gladiators.
Show me what you got. Show me what you got.
The producers, say Walter Parks and Douglas Wick, from what I can gather, and again, this is from the making of book and stuff, it doesn't sound like there was anyone else in the frame. I don't even know if Spielberg had considered it, because I know there's a lot of Spielberg films that he started out developing and then was just like, no, I'm too busy, someone else can do it. For example, I read or listened to a podcast recently that Interstellar was originally with Spielberg, and he developed it for a while before spun out into a completely different thing with Christopher Nolan. Yeah, however, Ridley Scott, they were like, this guy is an amazing visualist. He's the guy to take it to. But at that time, the script was a little bit rough. So they basically put in front of Ridley Scott this painting by, I'm going to butcher this pronunciation, Jean-Léon Gérôme's, and a painting from 1872 called Pollice Verso, which means thumbs down. In that, it shows like a still from Gladiator. Essentially, it's the Colosseum. You've got this big, muscly gladiator standing over somebody he's defeated and killed. He's got the spiked trident. It's the big sort of metal helmet, and he's looking up to those in power who are giving him the thumbs up and thumbs down. And Ridley Scott just took one look at it. Was like, oh my god, I want to make this movie. And Walter Parks is like, hang on, we haven't told you what the story's about. And he's like, I don't care.
No, sold.
I want to do it.
Might need to switch the thumbs around, otherwise the audience will get confused.
Yes, so you've read that as well. So apparently in olden Greek and Roman times, thumbs up actually means sword up, kill him, and thumbs down means sheathe your sword. But they were like, well, that's too confusing for modern audience because thumbs up means good, thumbs down means bad. So they've just gone for the modern iteration.
It's much more prepubescent than that as well, the origins, because thumbs up is the short swords up is a sign of virility.
But of course.
That's where it comes from. And so it's from Roman times. A thumbs up means I can still get hard. That's what it is, because they were plagued by whatever. And so it went on to mean sword. And it's obviously, it was so... it was so of the time that it was like, it actually meant, yes, it's a positive thing to kill. But you can see where they're like, no, we don't want thumbs up to mean kill someone. That could have serious consequences.
What I'm sort of trying to work out, Ridley Scott has made some huge films, some of the biggest films, or some of the best and most loved films of all time. You know, Alien, Blade Runner, Thelma and Louise. He did Thelma and Louise in 1991. This was obviously being developed in the late 90s. He did two films during the 90s apart from Thelma and Louise, and it was G.I. Jane and White Squall. And I think both of those are very low down on people.
Never heard of White Squall. Never heard of it.
White Squall is something about sailing.
Fishing?
It's about a sailboat in a storm or something. But yeah, neither of them are very well loved. So it was almost like Ridley Scott was looking for a new hit and something to get his teeth into. And I think for him, and especially with the advances in CGI, there was that whole thing of, well, everyone's trying to do all this sci-fi stuff with CGI, but no one's really gone back and done it in history. And I think that also, recreating Rome appealed to Ridley Scott as well. And when it comes to casting, obviously I'll talk about some other casting choices in Coulda, Woulda, Shoulda later, but in terms of winning Russell Crowe over, apparently again the script wasn't in a good place. Russell Crowe says he managed to get his hands on a copy and he said it was shit. But the pitch that they gave him was, it's 184 AD, you're a Roman general, and you're going to be directed by Ridley Scott. And he's like,
I'm in.
Yeah, that was it. He was like, I'm in.
Son of a bitch.
Yeah, I'm in. So yeah, it seems like there was a lot of big idea, big concept, but the script was continually being worked on and continued to be worked on.
Can we just talk a little bit about, just before we move on, because I think there's a time to talk about the cast and the script. Let's talk about that approach from Ridley, because I remember this from obviously hoovering up the DVD about this recreating the opportunity that CGI, the opportunity that CGI that it offered was like, we could recreate the Colosseum. We could send cameras to the Colosseum now and put them around 360 and we'll create the rest by computer. It'll be amazing. And I think for the time, my point is, I think this is probably one of the best uses of CGI in 2000. And we could look at the other films that were out at the time. The Matrix went, wow, mind-boggling futuristic stuff and really made its mark there. And this went to the other way and said, yeah, that's fine. But look at what I've been able to do with this film. And it still stands up today, the CGI in this film.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, it's something that in a lot of films, I think that's the most impressive CGI, the stuff that you don't expect to see. Like there's a really famous one for like Wolf of Wall Street. A lot of the buildings and sets and stuff in that, like, his beach house and stuff is all being done in CGI. And yeah, I think this was one of the first examples of them saying, well, yeah, we can create anything in a computer, any backdrop, and it's fantastic. And so I was like, well, we haven't really done it obviously there's a little bit of it in the Brendan Fraser Mummy movie, 1999, but I know they did a lot of it was miniatures and scanned in, but yeah, and I think for the Mummies, it was like the opening and sort of closing bits, the bit of the prologue type stuff.
But this technology was seriously accelerating. Like you had Phantom Menace in 99, then and Matrix. Then you had this, all being made around the same time. And what I think stands out is that he does some very clever stuff with the CGI. In that there's the stuff where we've just got which they don't do in the Phantom Menace, where we've got the open shot, we've got the panorama of Rome.
Yeah, let's
put in some birds. Let's put in some smoke to give depth and definition. And he does that a few times in this. And I think that and there's another like a blue fadey shot when they first arrive, when they're going to Rome, and it's like a dream above a hill. It's like a dream sequence, and you start to see.
Well, for me, that's very noughties. It's that it's that Spielbergy dark, a bit like Minority Report. Let's put a filter over it. Let's go dark.
Blue filter. But I also see, because it's just after, I don't want to jump too much, but there are some elements in this film where Ridley does show, I can do TV adverts. I can do music videos. There's bits with Russell Crowe floating along the ground and Elysium and all that. It's he's showing his origin. But I just think that, you gave CGI to a director like George Lucas, and you give it to a director like Ridley Scott, and I think of the time, this trumps anything that George Lucas did with. And he had more money than Ridley Scott, is my point. This was one film, one chance, and we've watched it again. It still stands up today. Didn't go too far.
Yeah, and I was thinking that when I was rewatching it the other night. So I rewatched it on Blu-ray. I think it's the first time I've seen it in high definition, and it looks fantastic. It still looks great, and I think that's the one thing that you and I have chatted about quite a bit about the Star Wars prequels, is that yes, they were using cutting edge technology at the time and really giving it their all, but it's dated really badly. They're like, a lot of the backdrops are so obvious, whereas in this, as you say, they're building them into environments like, with the Colosseum, they only built the set the first 2 floors up.
It's not overused. Overused. Yes, you're right. So it's the definitions in the background, and they do this full 360 thing of the Colosseum, and then when you get down to the nitty gritty on the sand of the Colosseum, it's all physical. It's all physical stuff going on in front of you. So
whereas you look at
perfection.
Attack of the Clones, which does have
a Colosseum type thing going on,
which apparently was inspired by Gladiator. You can, and again, they've done some great miniature work and scanned that in, but it still feels, I don't know, maybe because it's an alien world, it still feels really rubbery.
Yeah. I mean, you both use the same word for Star Wars, rubbery.
Yeah. But yeah, anyway, maybe we should spend some time. That is the perfect time to talk about first memories, but it is tied in, as you're saying in the opening, about this being a huge thing on DVD. I think this is one of the first DVDs that came out as a special edition, i.e. 2 discs. Because they had, as you said... I
remember this as the first DVD. I just do. It was the one to have.
Well, I remember you talked about the first 2 you had was Matrix and X-Men, wasn't it? Well, Matrix 99, X-Men's 2000. My first DVD was Crouching Tiger. I think that was 2000 as well.
It was that time. So I just remember the cutoff point was me going to university in 1999, and there I was with my copy of the Matrix VHS. And then 6 months later, well, probably less than that, a few months later, I bought the DVD of The Matrix, and I had both of them. And there were a few films where you had both, what do I do? Oh, this is a better video, but fucking hell, it's not DVD. And lo and behold, very soon we moved on. But this was a moment. This was a moment where we were, and obviously, listeners, as you know, I'm very much the host. George has always been into his film, has studied film. When DVD came along, I was just like, this was made for you. All the behind the scenes stuff, all the documentary stuff. I just knew that George would lap that up. But for this film, I lapped it up. We both all shared the special edition. So I was at uni, and we were still seeing each other a lot, and but DVD for us was amazing, wasn't it? It was just like, we've been waiting for this medium to come along.
Well, and you think about it, like in terms of, this is going back so far, this is pre-YouTube. So when you bought a film, it was, you wanted to like hoover up all the extra special features available, because you're like, oh, well, yeah, fuck it, I've splashed out 20 quid for this, I want to see the making of and how they brought it all together, because usually you got like snippets of that on TV in the past, but it was a proper deep dive. And I think obviously the filmmakers around that time, as you're saying, because it was a brand new film, they were like, we've got DVD, we've got to get as much content as possible. And yeah, I say we at that time, because DVDs were so new and hungry, we were like, there's more there's more stuff to watch. Yes, I've got to splash out for the special edition, because it's got all that other stuff I'm gonna watch once and probably never again.
I do think, sadly, it's something that's been lost. Because I think we had this period of like 10 years from 2000 2010 where there was extras, some great stuff. The last time we dabbled with 2000, we covered Mission Impossible 2. When we covered the original Mission Impossible, we did them as, check out those episodes if you've not listened to them, and we covered both of them. And on this MI2, there's this brilliant sketch with Ben Stiller and Tom Cruise, the Tom Cruise and Tom Cruise, done especially for the DVD, and this would follow on. And would you not agree it's something that we seem to have lost? I mean,
well, no,
maybe I'm not buying the special editions that have these on. Maybe there's an entire way that they do it now, that you get the bog standard stuff and you've got to pay more for the extras.
I know with iTunes you can get the extras, and that's one of their selling points. And I know Disney Plus quite kindly when you select a film, you can jump along and it will have some extras, but it varies by film, and it's not like a DVD that you have everything. You might get a few trailers, or it's not an exhaustive list, but they're doing it and Disney are being a bit clever with it, because I suppose they need to have more content. But yeah, I agree. I think it's something that's died out. But I think at the same time, that's why, there's still a lot of film fans out there like us that do lap up physical media for those reasons. Like I to jump back to our previous episode on Top Gun, I sent Charlie a recording of the menu screen that I've got on my Top Gun special edition, because I was like, remember when DVD and Blu-ray used to have they'd obviously had a bit of budget and said to like a 3D computer studio, right, I want to really slick with the camera whipping round and showing all these F-16s and stuff like that, and it was amazing. And with Gladiator, it's my special edition or commemorative DVD, I think it's like a 15-year anniversary, is very bog standard, but it's still, there's loads of features on it.
I think what's funny about this film is that we were so much in love with the medium that had just arrived. And I can remember, years that would follow, like you mentioned before, Matrix, X-Men, and this was when I was playing them, yes, listeners, on my computer. It was the only DVD-ROM I had. There was no DVD player. There was no PlayStation 2 at this stage.
Yeah.
And that was the killer thing about the PS2 when it arrived. I was watching these on my, I can't remember, it was a Compaq, whatever. It was my uni computer. That's what I was watching these films on. And the other one was South Park, Bigger, Longer, Uncut. That was the other DVD I had. And I'm talking about, we were starting to build a collection. I'm looking around this room now. I think George and I probably have about 200 DVDs each, and I've got about 50 or 60 Blu-rays and a few 4Ks now. It's a dying medium, but it was the fact that when this arrived, we'd come back from the pub, we'd put on Gladiator, and you'd watch and like, oh, just the opening scene, let's just put it on. And this would continue with stuff like Lord of the Rings and Bad Boys and a few other action films of that time, but like.
The great thing about DVD, and again, this is really showing our age, is the fact that you could skip to a part in the film. You didn't have to fucking rewind or forward. You could go.
That's exactly what I was just going to say. Yeah. You could say, let's watch this scene, skip to a scene. That's why if you got a DVD and you had scene selection, theatrical trailer, and a couple of deleted scenes, you're happy as Larry.
Biographies.
Like, wow.
Interactive menu.
And now we've got to the stage where, there's only the theatrical trailer. This isn't good. But I don't know. It comes, I mean, we can finish off this bit talking about DVD, but this was the film in the moment. I can just remember watching this film and picking scenes and watching it and then feeling inside like, I'm not doing this film justice. I'm enjoying watching 10 minutes of Gladiator, but I want to watch the whole thing. It's dry. Should we keep watching it? It's a proper performance. It's a proper thing. It isn't just 5 minutes of quick action. The same you could say for certain parts of Lord of the Rings, but this was the moment we lived in. It was cool. And this was the film. It was this and The Matrix. It was just like this medium has arrived and it opened up many possibilities. And we go back to it today and we can watch it on streaming, you can watch it on Blu-ray. There's probably going to be, if there isn't already, I didn't check, there's probably a 4K version.
I assume there will be. I say I've just got the Blu-ray, which I thought did look fantastic.
How do we jump from Production Chat Island? I mean, do you want to talk about? There is more trivia. There is. We need to talk about the cast and the deaths and the script.
I think, it is important to talk about how troubled this film was. So I say, whilst it was Dave Franzone's idea, and he'd written the script. Ridley Scott felt the dialogue was too on the nose, and hired John Logan, who's worked on quite a few Ridley Scott films and productions, and would go on to do things like Skyfall and The Aviator. So he did a rewrite, and he wrote most of the first act and made the decision to kill off Maximus's family to increase his motivation. Then another writer, William Nicholson, came in just even before they were just about to film, because a lot of the actors were getting the scripts and they were like, this doesn't make sense. And he made Maximus a more sensitive character, brought in the role from, is it Demon Honsu of Juba, developed the whole afterlife part of the film, so it made Maximus, I say, more sympathetic character. And even Russell Crowe has gone on record saying that he wrote a lot of his own dialogue. He said, I don't know if I'm going to do the Russell Crowe impression, but he said, we had one American writer, one English writer, and of course a group of producers who were adding their ideas, and then Ridley himself. Then on the occasion, Ridley would say, look, this is the structure for it. What are you going to say in that? And I'd be doing my own stuff as well. And there'd be times like Ridley'd be like, right, so you're staring out into the battlefield, and then you see this Robin, and Russell Crowe's like, yeah, but what the fuck am I supposed to say? And that goes back to one of my issues about Ridley Scott. He's a fantastic visualist, but sometimes the story gets a little bit lost. And apparently there's a book that covers screenplays, and apparently says, though dozens of the versions of the script for Gladiator were written, the original 130-page draft from 1997 is different in almost every detail from the finished movie. So, I mean, wow. I think the character was a wrestler at the start, so basically, it's weaving in some historical facts about Marcus Aurelius and about Commodus, the fact that they're sort of very different leadership styles, the fact that Commodus was all about Rome was going to shit, but he was like, oh, let's distract people by putting the games on. And he was just... And
he was the emperor, the fall of the Roman Empire.
Yes.
He is kind of seen as the reason.
And obviously they've woven in, so apparently Marcus Aurelius died on whilst out in, he was always out on the battlefield trying to sort things out, and he died out in the field of the plague, but because apparently Commodus rushed back to Rome so quickly after his death, there was rumours that it was a bit suspicious, but obviously they've embellished it.
Good movie plot.
And even the character of Maximus, whilst I think when I was younger thinking, oh, it's a bit far-fetched that the emperor would hand over Rome to a general, there's actually various characters in history that have worked up from, being a humble sort of servant to a general to actually becoming, there's so many emperors and rulers throughout sort of Roman history.
Genghis Khan was a general, I think.
Yeah, so, and Commodus was actually killed by, not a gladiator, but he was killed by a wrestler. So, yeah, there's lots of different strands they've pulled in to the story, but it seems like it was, even, I say, on set, they were rewriting dialogue and challenging dialogue and stuff like that. And there was
lots of ad-libbing. Because apparently, and this is Charlie trivia, but I hoovered up that DVD. But the kitchen that Maximus describes with herbs and stuff is Russell Crowe's kitchen in Australia. He was ad-libbing, and the other bit is with the whole "Am I not merciful?" With that's totally ad-libbing. That's why Connie Nelson was terrified by Joaquin Phoenix going full nutter.
Well, apparently I was just reading today, Connie Nielsen's like a massive history buff.
Yeah, she was big on the Romans, so she had jewelry and stuff.
But they were giving her dialogue, and she was like, they wouldn't say, like, there was like a line of dialogue that said something like, we don't want Rome to turn into a police state. And they're like, police state? That's not going to be... And, such and such belongs in a museum. It's like, Romans wouldn't have had museums.
It was probably useful to have her around.
Yeah, it sounds like she was very useful. But yeah, let's get into the casting. So I think this was the first time, well, obviously one of his earliest roles was in Parenthood, but I think this is one of the first times that we saw the proper actor, that's Joaquin Phoenix, and it's an amazing, the first of many amazing performances.
Yeah. Hello, I'm here. I'm going to be here for a while.
And he's so sinister. He's a little bit camp. He's very incestuous. Yeah, he's brilliant. He's a very brilliant villain. And I remember being very impressed watching it first time. I mean, obviously, as you say, it's a career-defining performance for Russell Crowe. It's he won an Oscar for it, but I think obviously he burst onto the scene with LA Confidential, and I think this was the film he did afterwards. But Ridley Scott was keen to give it that, to round it out with some key classic British actors. So yeah, you've got Derek Jacobi, you've got Richard Harris, and the amazing Oliver Reed, amongst
My God, I mean, the fact that they're setting this up, that you've got dying Maximus, the Richard Harris delivering what would be his last performance, performance of a Caesar. It's so so momentous.
I don't know if it's good dialogue or it's just been delivered by pure thespians, because everything that Richard Harris delivers, it has so much pathos to it and so much gravitas.
It's not just him, though. It's him. It's Oliver Reed. It's Derek Jacobi. These actors are the top of their game. I mean, they will live on in infamy as those three actors would be. Derek Jacobi's still kicking about.
Yeah, I mean, and I think obviously, we would lose Richard Harris a few years later. I think it was like only a year later. 2002.
Well, 2002. Yeah, so 2 years later.
But yeah, I think obviously, Oliver Reed was. I haven't seen many Oliver Reed films. I mean, it's more of his sort of off-screen antics that he's more renowned for.
I just want to go on the beers with him.
Yeah, and no, it's such a brilliant performance. Again, he's devouring that dialogue. You thrust your sword in a man, the crowd will love you forever.
Yeah, he could be describing anything. He could be describing a football match, cricket game, a big netball game, badminton game, whatever it is. I don't want to, but I mean, the way he talks about the crowd, and I want to see him be a gladiator. And am I not right in thinking that we would have seen that had he not passed away?
Yeah, I read that and I couldn't find much other source to it. I think it was in the IMDb trivia, and I think it's a really interesting coulda, woulda, shoulda that most people know Oliver Reed died during filming, and they said that they had most of his scenes already filmed, but then they had to do some rewrites. But yeah, there's some sort of rumor online that originally Maximus would have had to fight Proximo, Oliver Reed's character, but Commodus had pitted him as almost like a final boss before he got to Commodus. Because you see the scene.
I believe it. Shall I tell you why? The reason I believe it is because he's built up so much before. And you can tell, obviously, he passed away, and there's that thing where the Praetorians storm his house, and it's obviously a double. Yeah, that
it's very well done. There's very little of it. Yeah,
and they reuse the audio so cleverly, because then they show his face.
Yeah,
and he says shadows and dust.
Yeah,
and then he gets stabbed, and it's so cleverly done. Like Ridley Scott should do more of that sort of stuff. No, I just think that whole scene with the gladiator at the end, is it Tigris or whatever he's called, the whole thing with the tigers?
Well, that's...
we were about to die. That would have made sense had that been Proximo. It would have been... And the thing, the final point I want to make about that, the tigers would have made more sense, because it would have been Claudius saying, you have to fight your mentor, Proximo, if you want to fight me. And I'm putting tigers in there, so you're both fucked. That's what I read into it. So I mean, it's still a great fight, but it would have made more sense with. You
do see him wearing I don't know if it's more of like just his character. You see him wearing armor when they've entered Rome, so he's still got his gladiator armor. So yeah, it does make you think a what if. It's a real shame that we obviously lost Oliver Reed, because it's such a reminder of how good an actor he was, and obviously had he been alive, the amount of work he would have got off the back of it.
I was thinking the same thing. I was like, why does he not get more work? Like,
because he did.
I mean, and I was just like, why? No, what I meant was like 5 years previous to this. Why hadn't we seen him? Why hadn't we seen him in a Bond film? Why hadn't he turned up in other stuff? What got him out onto this film? Because that's some pretty smart casting.
Well, apparently he didn't want to do it. He was just like, I think that was he was his own worst enemy, that he was really stubborn and drunk a lot of the time, and he refused to like audition for stuff. So he's like, oh, you know, if they want me, they'll cast me, sort of type thing. And I think I was reading an interview, a clip from Michael Winner, and he was working with Michael Winner when he got the audition, and he's like, oh, I don't know if I can be bothered with this. You know, it was a Swords and Sandals movie, and Michael Winner was like, you're going to do it. You're going to do the audition, and you bloody well, you know, pull your finger out your ass, sort of type thing. And I think that was it. I just don't think, because he was such a legendary Hellraiser, I don't think a lot of people wanted to work with him, even though you could get a great performance out of him. I think he was so unpredictable. Yeah, he was just too much of a liability. But just to go, you know, you mentioned about him being, you know, in a Bond villain or in a Bond, but a long time ago, I think he was a candidate for Bond himself after, I think, as a replacement for Connery. And in his,
I remember you mentioning that when we were doing this on our Bond special, when before they looked at Lazenby, he was considered so dashing, just not tall enough. But I just love him in this film. I can remember, because going back to our chat about watching this on DVD, there were certain bits you would cut to. You know, there were certain. And I don't think they were that ahead of the game, but like you'd skip scenes, you'd skip certain scenes to go, oh, I want to see the other battle. And then we'll go to bed. We'll just go back from the pub. And I'd never skip his scenes. It was just like when he's talking to, I don't know, I guess it shows how far Russell Crowe's career has gone in the fact that he's the young guy in this. And I think it'll probably come up in Coulda, Woulda, Shoulda that another actor who had played this role before was offered it. And you could totally imagine it, but this is Russell Crowe on the scene. I want to say he's in his 30s.
Drinking beers and starting fights fighting around the world.
Speaking of Russell Crowe, speaking of Oliver Reed, apparently, and this is once again probably Reddit or IMDb trivia, but apparently Oliver Reed, they did not get on.
No.
Oliver Reed asked him for a fight. I love it. It's like, I get the feeling that Russell Crowe took over the mantle from Oliver Reed. It's like, oh, that's how you live. That's what I'm like. I think it was like two guys, you know.
Yeah, I think it was a bit of a weird dynamic because obviously Richard Harris and Oliver Reed went way back, so they were mates, and Richard Harris and Russell Crowe became very close.
Got on very well, yeah.
Yeah, apparently Oliver Reed died on the floor of a pub after challenging some sailors in Malta to a drinking contest. So that was on one of his days off. But yes,
it's going to go down in flames.
But yeah, as you say, it's a fitting final performance.
As for the movie, I don't know if have you got anything else you want to talk about in terms of cast?
Yeah, I mean, what do you want to talk about movie-wise? From the very opening, you almost kind of forget about the whole the barbarian hordes and stuff. They're
fighting Germania, and so there's I guess I think for simplicity's sake, I say this film it hits you in two ways. It's epic. The battles are epic, and we had not had films like this. We'd spent the 90s, well, we hadn't anyway, we hadn't been watching period dramas, or period dramas were full of lovey-dovey Pride and Prejudice, Forsyth Saga rubbish. We hadn't had a Spartacus. That was what, 70s and 80s. We hadn't had that. Or Ben-Hur, whatever you want to call it. This was our first foray for our generation into, do you remember the Romans? What have they ever done for us? And so there's the epic scale of that, and you see things in this first opening scene, which is amazing, with all of the fire arrows and the choo-choo, choo-choo-choo, and then the Praetorians on their horses. So on one side, this film is epic, and it delivers it Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, almost to the minute. You know, like, here's Act 1, here's Act 2, here's Act 3. But something that hit me much more this most recent time, was the emotion. You can't, and I think it's Mr. Hans Zimmer with the music, but you can't watch this film especially since having children, that the whole story of Maximus's character doesn't resonate a bit harder. But I can remember this film being very moving when I didn't care about anybody but myself back in 2000. And now I cared about it then, and I just care about it more now. It's really moving.
Yeah, no, as you say, I think one of the first big appearances of, or the first sort of breakthrough scores for Hans Zimmer, and something that we joke about with a lot of composers, reusing stuff elsewhere. So I think we can play them at some point, but before
they made their mark, they were selling out to a lot of folk. Kamen.
They're all, we've joked about Michael Kamen, we've joked about
Silvestri,
Alan Silvestri, even John Williams is guilty of James Horner. They're all guilty of reusing bits. Danny Elfman, but
they've got stuff they like.
And Hans Zimmer's Gladiator theme and Pirates of the Caribbean are very close together. The whole operatic vocal stuff that in this is really emotional, and as you say, really sells those afterlife scenes, or where he's reaching out to his family. But that's something that, for me, like, it's one of the few negatives. It's very emotional, but it became such a sort of noughties trope of that kind of. It's done similarly in his brothers, in Tony Scott's Man on Fire, and that the whole Hans Zimmer bombastic operatic sound, and even Mission Impossible. It's the same thing with Mission Impossible 2. It's that sort of vocal
slow-mo. Doves.
But it became very much a noughties staple, but it's done so well here.
I just like to think that it was like Kids in the Sweet Shop. That's how I put Matrix. You could put them all in the same boat, like Star Wars, Matrix, Mission Impossible 2, and this film. It's like, okay, so we've got this cool technology. You can use whatever soundtrack you like, and you can do loads of slow-mo. You can cut it all together, no reshoots, and you can just make stuff appear with computers. And I think it's like you apply it to all of those directors. It's sort of Kids in the Sweet Shop. And maybe, am I getting the timing right? Would Minority Report been about the same sort of time? That would have been Spielberg's time.
2 years later.
Yeah. Okay, so you get, but you hear what I mean? It's like, it's interesting to see how these directors reacted to what they had at their fingertips. And that's why I think full credit to Cerritos for the masterpiece, the epic masterpiece that is this film, because I don't know, it's almost like a film we could have brought Dad on for, because he loves this film. Because I did say to Dad the other day, I was like, no, we're recording, and we're going to be doing Gladiator. I was almost like, we should probably have you on, because it was a big film for him too, because he would have lived through Spartacus and everything. And he's like, no, it's a great film. It's...
No, I remember going to see it with him, and I remember saying, he'd grown up with a lot of, and that was the thing we haven't really touched on, the whole swords and sandals. Well, you touched on it earlier, the whole swords, but the whole swords and sandals genre had died out, and so much so that it became one of the best jokes in Airplane about, Joey, do you like movies about gladiators? Because they were so like camp and overblown, and that's it. But I think by the 80s there was nothing, and obviously the 80s had a bit more of a fantasy element. Excalibur and Legend. Ridley Scott, Conan,
Tom Cruise,
and all those things. So this was sort of the first sort of throwback to it, and I remember Dad saying, "Oh, it's like." There's a big 60s film, the fall of the Roman Empire, all about that same time period. And ironically, I think Richard Harris was originally cast in that film and dropped out. I think he was due to play Commodus. Yeah, I remember Dad saying, "Oh, it's like Fall of the Roman Empire, but with loads more action in." But he wasn't complaining because it was so well done. And it's funny that this film, as you're saying, Ridley Scott's done it, so well, but it feels like this film is lightning in a bottle, because despite all the rewrites, production challenges, one of your key cast members dying during production, it's an amazing film that that Ridley Scott himself has struggled to recapture. So he would obviously go on to do was it Kingdom of Heaven with boring what's his face Orlando Bloom, and
nobody's done Robin Hood with Russell Crowe, and I think that had Hans Zimmer on the music. They were like, let's do it again.
Well, that's
we can't fail.
And that was the whole hype of it's the guys that did they've got the gang back together.
Haven't seen it because the reviews. I haven't seen it.
It's just dull and bloated. But then this film is so influential because I say it was a dead genre, but then within a few years later you get Troy,
Gods and Kings,
Alexander, King Arthur, and obviously the very camp homoerotic 300.
Oh, can we superimpose more abs?
More slow-mo.
More glistening.
Which, again, goes back to the whole camp and, ridiculousness of the original sort of...
Which is what Ridley was trying to avoid. He said, I don't want to see anybody sitting around eating grapes or drinking from goblets. I want to make it more real. I don't know what else there is to say other than going back for a rewatch. I mentioned it earlier, the set pieces all stand up. Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. They're brilliant. The battles are brilliant and nice use of physical with some CGI, but CGI's background in this.
Yeah. And I think the thing I forget about is that, yes, you've got all this action, you've got this revenge story, but there's also, I say there's so much work being done on the script, but there's the politics throughout about the whole power play for Rome, and I forget
the mob.
Yeah, and I forget how that's woven in, and it's not too overbearing. It's there, and it's all about, well, who's going to take over and give it back to the Senate and all that scheming and stuff.
Which was going on. There were snakes, adders being put in beds, all that stuff that you see in that act. It's obviously, it's all, squashed into this last act where it's like some people are poisoned, some people got snakes, some people are stabbed. But this was going on for years, for decades. Yeah. Like this is how, what you see going on in Westminster, like, oh, they're scoundrels. It's horrible what they do to each other. This is how it was done in Rome. It was like poisoned, stabbed, killed, snake in the bed. Drowned, just killed the children at birth, whatever it was. This was it. But it's interesting that, as you say, I think the most interesting thing about this film was in 2000, you get this film, you get so many things arriving and departing. You get Richard Harris and Oliver Reed at the end. Then you got Connie Nelson. I think she was in Devil's Advocate and maybe another film. She didn't go on to maybe have a big career, but she was hot for a while.
She's cropped up in Wonder Woman.
I was going to say, was she in Wonder Woman? That's the other thing. I wasn't sure if it was her. Is she Australian?
I thought she was Australian or something, but she's Danish.
Okay. Anyway, she's hot and she's a very good actress, and she's probably should have had more films as a result.
Agreed.
So I don't know what else there is to say. I think we've given Mr. Zimmer his due. But there's going to be some coulda, woulda, shoulda, I guess. Is there anything else you want to say before we jump onto that?
Well, no, just to quickly jump back to the whole sort of politics and scheming thing. I read this very apt comparison for the 20-year anniversary from The Guardian, and they said... It said, now Gladiator is ancient history itself, but in some ways its story is more relevant now than it was then. An undeserving despot who hijacks a mighty empire and betrays its principles, who sidelines the wise politicians and distracts the citizens from his corruption with violent populist spectacle.
You can't make this shit up. But what was the other thing I read? Just on that note, I'm just trying to, it's crazy how when they're talking about the mob, just give the people what they want. Just give the people what they don't know that they need. Yeah.
There's a line from Derek Jacobi, and I can't remember what it is, but I remember just before he said it, I said the line for him because I remember it was so ingrained in my brain. It was something like, you'll give them blood, you'll give them violence, and they'll love him for it.
I think that says so much about, I watched this DVD so much, and we would go on to watch many other DVDs, but I think when this DVD came out, you'd got your hands on a DVD player, maybe you were like me, it was your computer. This was one of the first ones he had, and so you watched it a lot. You watched all of the stuff on it, and you watched the scenes again. And so, yeah, this is as quotable to us probably as Star Wars. There are two things that we have to mention because this is Retro Ramble. The tie-in with Universal Soldier, our friend, what's he called?
Oh, you've got Ralph Muller.
Ralph Muller. Who's got the most lines that we will see from Dear Ralph. Such a unit. He can't be stopped by conventional arrows.
Yeah, he has to be stabbed multiple times and shot with several arrows. Yeah, he's one of the gladiators, but also the tiger guy, Tiger Mask. That is Sven Ole Thorsen, Arnie's mate, who crops up in loads of
Running Man and the Running Man.
Well, he's the guy that gets the stick around in Predator.
Now, we haven't really delved into it a lot. I just want to bring this up because George and I obviously have watched this film in preparation for this episode. George watched this before me and gave me the heads up. It's like the script. The script is so good. But he did raise something with me. It's like, but the incest track. And I was like, yeah, I just don't think it's that on the nose. I just don't think it's anything worth commenting on. I hadn't seen this film. I think both of us, we hadn't watched this film for about 5 years at least. And I watched this film, and it in the third act, he's like, "You will love me, and you will give me a child." I always thought it was really subtle. That it was like he really has a thing for his sister, but no, I'd forgotten or I'd misremembered because it's like, "You will love me, and you will give me a child." It's like,
I was the exact same thing. It's like I don't remember it being this incestuous.
Wow, he's gone full sister.
And I thought that, I was thinking, it's obviously, it's very Game of Thrones-esque, but then I did a quick search, and the first Game of Thrones book was published in 1996, so it might not have inspired Game of Thrones, but...
Let's just say they're both inspired by the time when this sort of crazy shit was going on.
It was fine to sleep with your cousin or your sister.
Rape, pillage, murder, it was the style at the time.
Pure blood, Charlie, pure blood.
So I think without further ado, let's release Jeff and Celine.
Your scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they could, they didn't stop to think if they should.
Coulda, woulda, shoulda is where George enlightens us into the actors who were considered for the roles, contacted, but didn't actually take the part. So, who we got?
So I can gather from your comment earlier that you were aware of this one because you
another Australian.
You thinly alluded to, and it makes sense because if you think about what had happened, like closest comparison to this film in that sort of time frame was for a big historical bloody epic was Braveheart, and apparently Mel Gibson was offered the lead role and turned it down because at 43 he felt he was too old. Let's get another grumpy, unpredictable Australian.
Do you know anybody else who can start a fight? I'd love to think they knew each other, but I don't think they did. Was anybody else considered?
Well, there's a few others I've seen, and again, I think it's IMDb. I'm detecting. Well, one of them I think is bullshit because one of them they're saying's Hugh Jackman, but he hadn't really. He was an unknown before he got picked for X-Men, which was 2000. So.
X-Men was his first thing, which was he would have been making X-Men when this film was being made.
Yeah, so that's what I'm thinking. So that's why I call bullshit on that. But the other one, which is a bit left field, but it makes sense because Maximus is the Spaniard. Banderas.
That would have been. He could have totally done it. Well, I'm sorry. I'm just going to go out there. He could have totally done it. Yeah.
I did read. And I'm sure I've read this before, that Russell Crowe did suggest to Ridley Scott, he's like, well, he's a Spaniard, so maybe I should play him with a Spanish accent. And Ridley Scott was like, please don't. Please don't even attempt that.
His Australian does creep through, but not as much as like some other actors. I mean, let's say, you've got Sean Connery in The Untouchables doing Irish. And then you've got, no, he's not bad.
I don't know if we haven't given enough respect to Russell Crowe. Yes, he's a little bit egotistical. He is he is a bit of a lot. But
this and LA Confidential are amazing films because of him.
Yeah,
I'll go that far.
Well, that's it. again, it's that delivery of, and even some of the dialogue, he was just like, I'm not saying that. And like, even the sort of, what we do now echoes in eternity. He's like, oh, that sounds like bollocks. And they're like, just say the fucking line, Russell. And he sells it. But he's very softly spoken. Do you not find that? Like, it works for him in certain, I think in, A Beautiful Mind, and LA Confidential. In LA Confidential, he doesn't say a lot because he's the muscle. Yeah. But there's bits in this where he talks and it's like, the words come out like liquid. Like he talks he's got a very... He's talking about the herbs in his garden and something. I'm obsessed about that scene. I'm just jealous. I just like an outdoor kitchen like he clearly has in Australia. I just don't want to start as many fights to get it. I'm just not wanting to go there. Starting fights and drinking beers, fighting around the world. We do love Russell Crowe, and in more modern times, we would both agree that, is it The Nice Guys? Is probably the closest thing you will get to buddy film comedy in the last decade. Oh yeah, so definitely check out The Nice Guys if you haven't seen that. To link back to Russell Crowe reminiscing on his family life in back in Spain, I'm going to introduce a new short-lived feature to Retro Ramble, which is called I Could Pretend to Be Your Wife. And it's just a bit of trivia that the lady that plays Maximus's wife in the flashbacks or what have you. Wait. I've seen her before, and I know I've seen her before. It's not Tina Turner. It's not. She's called Giannina Facio. So she's the wife of Maximus, but would go on to marry Ridley Scott in 2015. So she's actually now Ridley Scott. As far as I know, they're still together. Ridley Scott's wife. So wow, and it only took him 14 years to get her number. Fair play, fair play, buddy. Will you go out with us, like? I will go back and live where I'm from, which is like Ashenden. It's crackers, man. Like, I'm a sir now, so I'll take you to Jarrah. That's exactly how Ridley Scott talks. Now, I do like listening to interviews with Sir Ridley Scott. It still creeps through. It still creeps through. And what I love is how gung-ho he is. He's like, I think I can't remember I think he was talking about that last Alien film that he made. Let's not talk about that right now. But his approach to it was, I'm gonna do it. I've got the rights to do it, and if you don't like it, you can sort it out in the editing room, and I'm out of here. That was kind of where he was with that. Well, apparently, Anthology. What's it called? That one? It's not Anthology. Covenant. Yeah, that one, he was like, this is what I'm shooting. This is what I'm giving you. You're not happy with the final cut? Yeah, you go make it into something else. You pay me what I want. And he was like that. He was like, I've done my work. It's my artistic product. You pay me what I want, and then you can do what you want with it. He keeps threatening to unleash another Alien film on us, but apparently he's still working on the Gladiator 2. Fuck knows what that's going to be about. There was a script in the sort of mid-noughties about, I think it was written by this songwriter Nick Cave, about Maximus fighting his way through the afterlife. I don't know why, because that'd be quite a dreamy music video inspired. Ridley's perfect for that. But it's sort of almost like, well, he's as accomplished his mission. He's got his revenge. Why does he need to get back into reality? But yeah, apparently they're working up. And then there was another script about zombies. Zombies in the afterlife. Do it. Fucking do it. Gladiator in space. No, I've just thrown that in there. No, zombie gladiators. He's transported through time for reasons. No, but like all of the fallen gladiators, he has to kill all of them to get to his family in Elysium. He first has to go back to Colosseum and kill all of the zombie gladiators who've died. And shut up. If you don't do it, Sky will. And summon them at robots for reasons. But yeah, I think we've from the sounds of things, we may have exhausted the well of Retro Ramble on this. All I can say is that it was an absolute pleasure, not just to speak to you again, dear brother, about this film, but no, to go back to this film. And I watched this in 2 sittings. I watched this in the evening, and I didn't realize how long it was. And then on my lunch hour, I just stuck it on the telly because I've got it on both DVD, Blu-ray, and it's on streaming. And there I am, 2:30 in the afternoon, welling up
That's just not real. You know, welling up about a freaking noughties film about swords and sandals, and I'm getting emotional. I'm just like, it's just so well produced. It's just great.
Can I shock you? You're not so similar. You and I did the exact same thing. I watched about 2 hours the other night, and I was like, "Oh, I'm really tired," and I've had a few glasses of wine. I'll watch the last 40 minutes later, and I ended up watching it on my lunch break yesterday and doing the same thing of like,
mustn't cry. He's giving Rome back to the people. Oh my God. Mustn't cry. I'm a man. So yeah, that's why I was saying.
Hands going through the wheat. His hands going through the wheat. He's going home.
Go to them. Go to them.
He's going to Ridley Scott's wife.
Yeah, I mean, just go to her. Yeah, I mean, that's another podcast episode in itself. What a romantic story. No, it's been a pleasure to go back to a great, epic, classic film such as this. I don't know how we can top it, so we're not even going to try. We're probably going to go back to some, I don't know.
Back in the time machine to something in the 80s, maybe.
Something in the 80s, remember? We've gone all the way back to 2000. We've got nosebleeds, but it's been good. And to be honest, ladies and gentlemen, that decade is here to stay. We are 2022, still 20 years ago. It's a long time. We can retro-ramble back there. We just can't go back to anything that recent. So, but 2000 to 2010, I'd say it's fair game. Right?
However, if you do want to hear recent stuff, then why not join our Patreon channel, where Charlie and I also get the chance, as well as reviewing stuff that slipped us by first time around, so like cult classics like The Warriors, Roadhouse.
We did Roadhouse, and then we've done lots of recent rambles on The Spider-Man, on No Time to Die, on Matrix, whatever we're calling it, the one that was out at Christmas, Resurrections, there we go. I knew it began with an R. They're trying to copy our alliteration. But no, up and coming, we have got a completely spoilerific spoiler special on Top Gun Maverick. And I know that there are some...
It should be out by the time you're listening to this.
It's already probably coming in your ears. Yeah. No, I mention that on this podcast because I think there are a few of our monthly episode listeners that would like to listen to that. And I'm sorry, the new stuff, it's on our Patreon. So it's there. Check it out.
Subscriptions start from only a couple of, £3, I think it is, the price of an overpriced coffee or an underpriced beer.
Or a return ticket on a train that's been cancelled. So,
topical.
I don't know what else there is to say apart from, are you not entertained? No, for this episode, this has been a Retro Ramble production. I am and have been Charlie McGee.
I'm George McGee.
And we will see you next time.
Thank you for listening. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Oh my God, it's Russell Crowe.
Oh my God, it's Russell Crowe. Oh my God. Why don't you mind your own business, you scrouter? Making movies, making songs, and fighting around the world.
Dude, why is this guy always beating everybody up?
What a glorious day to spend